I don't know what time it was when the power went out. Late, maybe 11. I was sitting on my kitchen floor eating cereal in the dark, like someone who had given up on the concept of dinner when I heard it, singing, faint, off-key, coming through the wall I shared with apartment 4B. Happy birthday to me. One voice, just hers. I'd lived next to this woman for 2 years. 2 years of nodding in the hallway, holding the elevator, pretending I didn't notice the way she smelled like vanilla and old books. I'd never once knocked on her door. But something about hearing someone sing happy birthday to themselves in the dark will make you do things you've been putting off. My name is Ethan. I'm 34. I write copy for a marketing agency that sells things I've never used to people I've never met. With a laptop I balanced on a throw pillow that has a coffee stain, shaped roughly like the state of Ohio. I moved into apartment 4A 14 months ago, the week after my divorce was finalized, because it was the cheapest one-bedroom that didn't smell like something had died in the walls. It smelled dead like pine sol and loneliness, which is slightly better. The building is on the 4th floor of a walk-up in the part of the city, where the sidewalks buckle from tree roots and nobody picks up the free newspapers. 6 units, thin walls, the kind of place where you can tell what your neighbor is cooking and whether or not they burned it. I'd chosen it specifically because it was temporary, a holding pattern. The kind of apartment where nothing permanent could possibly take root. 14 months later, I was still there. The throw pillow still had the stain. I still hadn't hung anything on the walls. I should tell you about the divorce, because it's the room I was sitting in even when I wasn't sitting in it. Her name was Caroline. We met in college, married at 26, separated at 32. That's 6 years. People always want the reason, the big thing. Was there someone else? Was there a fight? Did something terrible happen? And the honest answer is no. Nothing terrible happened. We just slowly became 2 people who were very good at living in the same apartment without ever quite being in the same room. We'd eat dinner at the same table and somehow be completely alone. We'd sleep in the same bed and wake up on opposite sides like the mattress was a continent, and we'd each chosen a coast. One night she said, "I don't think you like me anymore." And the awful part was I didn't argue. Not because it was true, but because I didn't have the energy to convince her otherwise. And that silence was the loudest thing I ever said to her. The papers came 3 months later. She kept the dog. I kept the throw pillow. The math felt about right. After, I did what divorced men in their thirst do. I told my parents I was fine. I ate cereal for dinner at least 4 nights a week and called it a lifestyle choice. I worked from the couch and stopped going outside for anything that wasn't groceries. I grew a beard not because I wanted one, but because shaving required standing in front of a mirror, and the mirror had started giving me a look I didn't care for. That's who I was when the lights went out. A man on a kitchen floor with a bowl of Cheerios, a dead laptop charging cable, and absolutely nothing happening to him. And then, the singing. It came through the wall, thin and wavery, the kind of voice that knows it's bad and doesn't care. "Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday day, dear June." And then a pause and a little huff that might have been a laugh or might have been something else entirely. And then she blew out what I assumed was a candle. I sat there in the dark with my cereal getting soggy, and I thought about what kind of person sings themselves happy birthday alone in a blackout. And then I thought about what kind of person sits on a kitchen floor eating Cheerios in the dark and judges someone for celebrating their own birthday, and that second thought got me off the floor. I knocked on her door before I could talk myself out of it. 3 knocks, not too loud, not too soft. The kind of knocks a person makes when they want credit for trying but also want plausible deniability if nobody answers. She answered. She was standing in the doorway holding a small round cake with a single candle on it, recently blown out, the wick still trailing a ribbon of smoke. She was wearing a flannel shirt that was 2 sizes too big, the sleeves rolled to her elbows, and her hair was pulled into a bun that was losing a fight with itself. She blinked at me. The candlelight from somewhere behind her caught the side of her face and made her look like a painting that hadn't decided what century it belonged to. I said hi. She said, "Is this about the singing?" I said no. She said, "Because I know it was loud. The walls in this building are basically decorative." I told her happy birthday. She looked down at the cake in her hands like she'd forgotten she was holding it. Then she looked back at me and smiled, and it was the kind of smile that arrives slowly, like it has to check with several departments first before being approved for public use. "Thanks," she said. "I made it myself. The frosting is uneven and I think the middle might still be raw, but it's chocolate, so morally it's correct." Her name was June. I learned this in the next 10 seconds, standing in a dark hallway lit by a single relit birthday candle, while the rest of the building creaked and settled around us like an old dog shifting in its sleep. June Calloway, 31. She worked at a used bookstore 6 blocks south, called Pages and Grounds, the kind of place that sells paperbacks and drip behind the register. She'd moved into 4B 3 years ago, after her last lease fell through. She liked crossword puzzles, could name every moon of Jupiter, and had a habit of narrating things under her breath when she was nervous, which she was doing now quietly. Something about the cake being too warm, and the hallway being too dark, and whether or not I wanted a slice. I said yes, to the cake, to the conversation, to standing in a dark hallway at 11-something at night, talking to a woman I'd spent 2 years pretending I didn't notice. She went inside and came back with 2 forks, no plates, and we sat right there in the doorway between our 2 apartments. The cake between us on the floor, the emergency exit sign at the end of the hall casting everything in a dull red glow. "You're the one who works from home," she said. It wasn't a question. "How'd you know that? You get packages at 2 in the afternoon, and your door smells like coffee at all hours. Also, I can hear you typing through the wall. You type like you're angry at the keyboard." "I'm a copywriter." "That explains the anger." I laughed. It came out louder than I expected, and it echoed a little in the empty hallway, and for a second I didn't recognize the sound. Not because it was strange, but because it had been a while. The laugh sat in the air between us like a guest who had arrived early and didn't know where to put their coat. We ate the cake. She was right. The middle was raw. We ate around it. She told me the chocolate was from a recipe her mother used, and that the trick was to use brewed coffee in the batter instead of water, and that every year she messed up the same step and every year it came out slightly wrong in the same way, and she'd decided this was part of the tradition now. I asked her why she was alone on her birthday. She tilted her head and studied me for a second, the way you study a sentence you're not sure you read correctly. "Most of my friends are in different time zones," she said. "Or different life stages, or both. You know how it goes. Everyone's somewhere else." I knew how it went. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. Maya is my older sister by 4 years. She's a speech therapist in Portland. She has 2 kids under 5, and she calls me every Tuesday at 7, and every time something goes slightly wrong in my life, which means she calls a lot. She started this habit 6 weeks after the divorce, when I made the mistake of telling her I was fine, and she correctly identified the word fine as a 4-letter lie and decided I needed monitoring. I stepped into my apartment to take the call. June gave me a small wave and went back inside, and I heard her door close, and the hallway was dark again, and Maya said, "You're up late." "Power's out." "Are you eating real food?" "Define real." "Ethan, I had cereal." "Cereal is not dinner. It is if you eat enough of it." She was quiet for a second. I could hear her kids in the background, or maybe it was her TV, or maybe both. There's always noise at Maya's house. She lives in the kind of chaos I used to find exhausting, and now find oddly comforting, the way you find a crowded restaurant comforting when you've spent too many nights eating alone. "How are you actually?" she said. Not a question, a drill. "I'm fine." "You've been saying that for 14 months. At some point, the word fine is going to file a restraining order against you." I told her about the singing. I didn't plan to. It just came out the way things do with Maya, who has this ability to create silences, so she can eventually force you to fill them. I told her about the birthday cake and the doorway, and the woman from 4B whose name was June, and who knew all the moons of Jupiter. Maya was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. "Ethan, you went over there?" I knocked on her door. "You knocked on someone's door voluntarily." It seemed like the thing to do. "You haven't knocked on a door voluntarily since before the divorce. You order everything online specifically, so you don't have to interact with delivery people in person. That's efficiency, not avoidance. That's avoidance wearing an efficiency costume, and we both know it." She wasn't wrong. Maya is almost never wrong about me, which is the most annoying thing about her, and she knows this, and she leans into it the way a swimmer leans into a current. We talked for another 5 minutes. She told me about her youngest learning to count and getting stuck on 7, just skipping it entirely. Going straight from 6 to 8 like 7 had personally offended him. I told her the power was still out, and I should probably find a flashlight. She said, "Go talk to the birthday girl, Ethan. You're allowed to talk to people." I talk to people. You talk to me and your clients, and the guy at the grocery store, but only about avocados. He has strong opinions about avocados. It would be rude not to engage. Good night, Ethan. Good night, Maya. I hung up. I stood in my dark apartment for a minute, listening to the building settle. Through the wall, I could hear June moving around, quiet sounds, a drawer opening, something being set down. The ordinary sounds of someone else's life happening 6 inches of drywall away from mine. I'd been hearing those sounds for 2 years. Footsteps, music, the kettle in the morning, the creak of her floorboard by the kitchen that was in the same spot as my creak. 2 years of living beside someone and never once sitting down with them. 2 years of proximity without contact, like 2 books on a shelf, spines touching, pages facing opposite directions. I went back to her door. I knocked again. She opened it faster this time, like maybe she'd been standing near it. She had a candle in each hand now, tea lights, the kind that come in bags of 100 from the drugstore, and the little flames made her face flicker between shadow and warmth. Back for more raw cake, she said. I brought a flashlight. I held it up. It was the small one from my junk drawer, the kind you squeeze to charge, the beam about as useful as a nightlight. Figured we could pool our resources. She looked at the flashlight. She looked at me. She stepped back from the door, just slightly. Just enough to be an invitation without being a declaration. I also have tea, she said, if you want. The stove is gas, so the burner still works. I was going to sit up anyway. Birthdays make me strange. I stepped through her doorway. The apartment was the mirror image of mine. Same layout reversed. Like looking at your own handwriting in a reflection. But where mine was bare walls and empty surfaces, hers was full. Bookshelves against every available wall. Paperbacks stacked 2 deep, some horizontal on top of the verticals. Plants in the window that looked healthier than anything in my apartment had ever looked. A guitar leaning against the arm of the couch with a thin layer of dust on the neck that said she owned it but didn't play it. A stack of crossword puzzle books on the coffee table. Most of them finished, the pages curling. It looked like someone lived here. I mean really lived here. Not the way I lived in my apartment, which was more like storing myself overnight. June's place looked like she'd reached into her own personality and turned it inside out and draped it across every surface. We sat on the floor of her kitchen because the couch felt too formal and the chairs felt too far apart, and she made tea on the gas burner by candlelight, and the kettle whistled, and she poured 2 mugs, and I held mine with both hands because the apartment was starting to cool without the heat, and she sat cross-legged across from me, and for a while we didn't say anything at all. It was the most comfortable silence I'd been part of in over a year. Outside, somewhere in the building, someone turned on a battery-powered radio, and an old song drifted through the walls, muffled and warm, and for a second the whole building felt like a single living thing breathing in the dark. June wrapped her hands around her mug. She looked at me over the rim of it, steam rising between us. "You know what I think is funny?" she said. "I've lived next to you for 2 years, and this is the first time we've ever actually talked. It took an entire citywide blackout to get you through my door." I took a sip of the tea. It was chamomile. It was perfect. "I'm not great at doors," I said. She smiled. "That slow one again, the one that checks with all the departments." "Well," she said, "the power's still out. The cake is mostly edible, and I don't have anywhere to be tomorrow until noon." She set her mug down. "So tell me something real, 4A. Tell me one true thing." I looked at her across the candlelit kitchen floor of an apartment that was the mirror of mine, but somehow warmer, fuller, more alive. And I thought about what Maya said. "You're allowed to talk to people." And I thought about 14 months of quiet, and 2 years of hallway nods, and the sound of someone singing happy birthday to themselves through a wall, and how some kinds of loneliness are so familiar you stop recognizing them as loneliness and start calling them your life. She was waiting. The candle between us flickered once and held steady. I opened my mouth to say something safe, something surface level, something a copywriter would say to a stranger on her birthday in the dark. Instead, I told her the truth. I told her I hadn't had a real conversation with another person in 4 months. Not a work call, not a check-in with Maya. A real one. The kind where someone asks you something and you answer with a version of yourself that isn't performing. I told her I had been eating cereal on my kitchen floor in the dark like it was a lifestyle and not a symptom, and that my entire week had peaked with a squirrel on my fire escape that seemed personally offended by my existence. She didn't laugh. She didn't do the thing people do when you say something honest, where they tilt their head and get soft and say something like, "Oh no, that's so sad." She just looked at me for a second. Then she cut another piece of cake and pushed it toward me on the floor. "The squirrel thing is interesting though," she said. "Were you making eye contact?" Sustained eye contact. Aggressive. It was the longest relationship I've had since my divorce. How long were you married? 6 years. And the squirrel? About 2 weeks, but we were really connecting. She smiled. Not the slow departmental one this time, a faster one. It showed up without clearance. We sat on her kitchen floor and ate cake that was half raw and fully chocolate, and she told me about the bookstore where she worked. Pages and Grounds. The cat behind the register was named Borges, after the Argentine writer, because he knocked books off shelves and stared at people like he knew something they didn't. She said the owner was a retired English professor who still wore tweed jackets in July and called every customer "Dear Reader," regardless of whether they were buying a book or just using the bathroom. I'm the only full-time employee, she said. Me and Borges, he gets better tips. I told her about my job, writing copy for things I didn't use, energy drinks I'd never tasted, productivity apps that promised to change your life in ways I hadn't verified. She asked me if I liked it, and I said it paid the rent, and she said that wasn't what she asked, and the accuracy of that observation sat between us like a third person at the table. We were still on the kitchen floor. The candles she'd placed around the apartment threw warm light across the walls, and I could see her place more clearly now. The bookshelves were the first thing you noticed, not because they were big, but because they were everywhere. Every wall that wasn't a window had one. Paperbacks shoved in sideways, stacked on top, wedged in at angles that defied the basic agreement between books and shelves. I could see the spines from where I sat. Novels, mostly. Old ones, new ones. Dog-eared ones with cracked spines that said she'd read them more than once. There were plants on the windowsill. 5 of them, maybe 6. Different sizes, different shades of green, all of them looking unreasonably healthy, considering the only light they were getting was from birthday candles and the red glow of the exit sign down the hall. While she was making more tea, she said something to one of them, just quietly, under her breath, not for me to hear but not hidden either. Something like, "You're doing fine, stop being dramatic." Are you talking to the plant? Her name is Barbara, she's a fern, she's going through something. What's she going through? I overwatered her last week, and now she's holding a grudge. You can tell by the way the leaves are curling. I looked at the fern. The leaves did look a little curled. I couldn't tell if that was resentment or just what ferns do, but June seemed confident in her diagnosis. The guitar leaning against the couch was a classical acoustic with a scratched body and a strap that had tiny embroidered suns on it. I nodded toward it. You play? I own a guitar. Those are different things. She poured the tea and brought it back to where we were sitting. I can play the first 4 bars of Blackbird and exactly nothing else. I've been learning it for 3 years. 3 years, 4 bars. At this rate, I'll finish the song when I'm 60. That's commitment. That's stubbornness disguised as a hobby. Something in the building changed. Not the power, but the silence shifted. A door opened somewhere below us and voices floated up through the stairwell, laughing. Someone calling out to someone else. A couple floors down, a battery-powered radio clicked on and started playing something old and slow. The kind of song that sounds better when you don't know the name of it. The building was waking up, not in the daytime way, with footsteps and coffee and the beep of the front door. In the other way, the blackout way. People coming out of their apartments because the usual distractions were gone. The screens dark, the Wi-Fi dead, and all that was left was the sounds coming through the walls and the option to knock on a door. Through June's ceiling, we could hear the couple upstairs talking. Not the words, just the rhythm. The low murmur of 2 people who had been together long enough that their voices fit together like parts of the same sentence. Through the floor below, someone was opening and closing kitchen cabinets, looking for something by feel. The building creaked and breathed around us, 6 apartments full of people doing the same thing we were doing, sitting in the dark, figuring out what to do with themselves. I love this, June said. She said it quietly, like she was talking to the fern again, like it wasn't meant for me, but she didn't mind that I heard it. The blackout. The sounds, you never hear them when the power's on. Everyone's behind their headphones and their shows and their air conditioning. But right now it's just people, being people. She looked at me. The candlelight caught one eye and left the other in shadow, and for a second her face was split perfectly between light and dark. And I had the disorienting thought that I was looking at someone who existed in 2 versions at once. You want to see something? She said. Follow me. She grabbed 2 candles, and I followed her out into the hallway and up the stairwell to the roof access door. It was supposed to be locked. She wiggled the handle a certain way, and it popped open. Mrs. Chen in 6A showed me. You push it left and up at the same time. She comes up here to smoke and doesn't want anyone to know, but she told me because I bring her dumplings from the place on 9th Street. The rooftop was flat and wide and bordered by a low wall. There were no lights up here, no lights anywhere. The city stretched out below us in every direction, and it was dark, genuinely dark, in the way cities almost never are. The buildings were silhouettes, the streets were shapes. The traffic lights were out, and the storefronts were black, and the apartment buildings that usually glowed with 1,000 rectangles of warm light were just outlines against the sky. And above it all, the stars. Not a lot. This was still a city, but more than I had ever seen from this rooftop or from any window in this neighborhood for as long as I'd lived here. The darkness on the ground had let the sky show up, and there were stars where there were usually just the washed-out orange of light pollution and the blinking red dots of cell towers. June set her candles on the wall and sat down on the roof with her legs stretched out in front of her. I sat next to her, not close, not far. The distance you'd leave for a third person who wasn't there. "That's Vega," she said, pointing. "The bright one, part of the summer triangle, and that, way over there, that's Arcturus, fourth brightest star in the night sky." Jupiter's moons and now stars? I went through an astronomy phase in my 20s. I bought a telescope and everything. It's in my closet somewhere, behind 3 boxes of books I haven't unpacked and a broken vacuum I keep meaning to fix. The astronomy phase ended. It got replaced by the crossword phase, which got replaced by the baking phase, which is why you're eating a cake with a raw center right now. She paused. I cycle through things. I get obsessed, I go deep, I move on. My therapist says it's how I process change. I think I just get bored. "I don't think you get bored," I said. I said it without planning to. It came out the way the laugh had come out earlier, surprising me more than it surprised her. She turned and looked at me. We were close enough now that I could see the candlelight reflected in her eyes, 2 small flames in the dark, steady and warm. "What makes you say that?" "People who get bored don't name their ferns." She held my gaze for a beat longer than a normal conversation allows. Then she looked back at the sky. "Barbara," she said. "Her name is Barbara." We sat there for a while. The old song from the battery radio downstairs had ended and been replaced by another one, quieter, something with a piano in it. The dark city below us looked like a photograph of itself, with the exposure turned all the way down. You could see the shapes of the water towers on the rooftops across the street, and the outline of the bridge in the distance, and the flat black strip of the river with nothing reflecting in it. I pulled out my phone and took a picture, the skyline without power, buildings as shadows, stars where the glow should be. I texted it to Maya with no message, just the photo. 3 dots appeared, then her reply. "You sound alive for the first time in months." I stared at that sentence. She hadn't heard my voice. She'd seen a photograph of a dark skyline sent at midnight with no caption, and somehow she'd read it perfectly. That was Maya. She could diagnose your entire emotional state from a text message the way some people can identify a song from the first 2 notes. I didn't reply. I put the phone back in my pocket. June had pulled her knees up and wrapped her arms around them. The temperature had dropped the way city nights do once the building stopped radiating stored heat. I could feel the cold coming up through the roof surface. She was sitting close enough now that I could hear her breathing, steady and slow, and at some point while I'd been looking at my phone, her shoulder had come to rest against mine. Not leaning, not pressing, just touching, the kind of contact that could be accidental and might have been. The kind where you notice it immediately but don't move, because moving would be an acknowledgement, and an acknowledgement would require a decision, and the decision would end whatever this was, this easy warm thing that was happening without either of us having to steer it. She reached for one of the candles on the wall and it had guttered low, almost out, the wax pooled around the wick. I reached for it at the same time. Our fingers met on the small glass holder, hers cold from the air, mine warm from the tea, and we both paused. Half a second, maybe less. The kind of pause that lasts exactly long enough for you to notice your own heartbeat. She pulled the candle toward her. I let go. "We should probably head back down," I said, "before the wax runs out." Something shifted in her face. Not a lot, not enough for someone who didn't know her to notice, but I saw it. A small rearrangement of expression, like a sentence being rewritten in real time. She'd been open, relaxed. The kind of open that happens when you forget to be careful, and now she remembered. "Yeah," she said, "it's getting cold anyway." She stood up and brushed off her jeans and picked up both candles and walked toward the stairwell door without looking back. I followed. We went down the stairs single file, the candlelight throwing our shadows long and strange against the concrete walls, and neither of us said anything for 2 full flights. At her door she turned. The hall was dark again. The dull red of the exit sign made everything look like a memory of a place instead of the place itself. "Thanks for the roof," I said. "It's everyone's roof. I just know the trick with the door." Still, she looked at me the way she'd looked at me before, on the roof, when I'd said the thing about boredom and ferns, like she was deciding something. Like there was a sentence forming behind her eyes that she was choosing whether or not to say out loud. She said, "There's still cake, if you want." It wasn't the sentence she'd been forming, I could tell. It was the safe one. The substitute, the one you say instead of the one you mean, because it's midnight, and the power is out and you just met someone and some things need more than one night to say. I should have said yes. I said, I should probably get some sleep. Work in the morning. The shift happened again, faster this time. A door closing behind her eyes, quiet and practiced, the way people close doors when they've had practice closing them. "Right," she said, "sure. Good night, Ethan." "Good night, June. Happy birthday." She went inside. The door clicked shut. I stood in the hallway for a moment, dark and quiet, the exit sign humming its low electric hum, and I listened to the sound of her footsteps moving away from the door and deeper into the apartment that was the mirror image of mine. I went back to 4A. I sat on my couch in the dark. My phone screen glowed with Maya's message, still unanswered. "You sound alive for the first time in months." Through the wall, I heard June set something down. A mug, maybe. Or a candle. Then quiet. Then, very faintly, so faint I might have imagined it, the sound of someone picking up a guitar and playing the first 4 bars of a song they'd been learning for 3 years. She played them twice, then stopped. Then the apartment next door went silent, and the building settled around us like an old dog in its sleep. And I sat in the dark on the other side of a wall from someone I was just starting to know, and I thought about all the ways a person can be close to something and still choose to walk past it. All the times I'd held the elevator and not said hello. All the months I'd heard her footsteps and her kettle and her singing and done nothing about any of it. And I thought about the way her shoulder had felt against mine on that cold roof, and the way her fingers had been cold from the night air when they touched mine on the candle. And the look on her face when I said I should get some sleep, instead of saying the thing we both knew I should have said. The power was still out. The city was still dark. And somewhere on the other side of 6 inches of drywall, June Calloway was awake on her birthday. And I was awake on a night that didn't belong to me. And between us was a wall that had always been there, but had never felt this thin. I don't know how long I sat there. 5 minutes. Maybe 20. Time does something strange when the power is out, and the only light in your apartment is the glow of a phone screen you're not using. I stared at Maya's message. "You sound alive for the first time in months." I thought about what alive meant. I thought about what the opposite of alive was and whether it had a name when you were still technically breathing and paying rent. And then I got up, crossed the hall, and knocked on June's door for the 3rd time that night. She opened it wearing a blanket around her shoulders like a cape. The candles behind her had burned lower, but there were more of them now. Tea lights lined up along the kitchen counter and the windowsill, turning the apartment into something that belonged in a different century. "I was hoping you'd come back," she said. She said it simply, like it was a fact about the weather. I sat down on her kitchen floor again because it was the spot that had already become ours, somehow, in the space of a tea without asking. The mug was warm. The apartment was cold. Through the ceiling we could still hear the couple upstairs, their voices murmuring like a song being hummed through a closed window. For a minute, neither of us talked. We just sat there, cross-legged on our kitchen floor, holding our mugs, letting the silence fill the room in a way that didn't feel empty. It felt full, like the silence itself was the conversation, and we were just letting it have its turn. Then June said, "You asked me earlier why I was alone on my birthday. You said your friends were in different time zones." "That's what I said. It's not why." She set her mug down, wrapped the blanket tighter. "My mom died 2 years ago, October. That's when I moved into this apartment, not because my lease fell through. I told you that because it's easier. The real reason is my old apartment was her apartment, and after she died I couldn't stand being in a place that still smelled like her, so I found the cheapest place I could, and I moved in 3 weeks later and I've been here ever since." She didn't look at me when she said it. She looked at the candle between us, the flame reflecting in her eyes, and I watched the wax slide down the side in a slow, uneven line. "The cake," I said. "Her recipe. Yeah, she made it every year on my birthday. Chocolate with coffee in the batter because she said water was for cowards. She always burned the edges and left the middle raw, and I always ate 2 pieces and told her it was perfect. June picked at a thread on the blanket. She died in October. My birthday is in June, 6 months apart. Every year I bake the cake wrong in the same way she baked it wrong, and I sing the song, and I eat it by myself, and for about 20 minutes I pretend she's in the other room. The kitchen was quiet. The couple upstairs had stopped talking. Somewhere below us a door closed. I thought about what to say, and everything I came up with sounded like something you'd find printed on a sympathy card, the kind with watercolor flowers on the front and a quote from someone you've never heard of. I didn't want to give her a sympathy card. I wanted to give her something real. The cereal, I said. She looked up. You asked me earlier why I eat cereal on the kitchen floor. It's not a lifestyle choice. It's because the kitchen table was Caroline's idea. She picked it out. It was the first thing we bought together when we moved in, this little round table from a flea market, and when I moved here I didn't bring it because looking at it made me feel like I'd failed at something fundamental. So I eat on the floor. Because the floor doesn't remind me of anyone. June was watching me now, not with pity, not with the soft tilted head. She was watching me the way you watch someone take a step off a ledge, not sure where they're going to land. The divorce, she said. What did it feel like? Nobody had ever asked me that. People had asked what happened, why it ended, whether we'd tried counseling, whether I was seeing someone new. But nobody had ever asked what it felt like. And the question landed somewhere in the center of my chest and sat there. Like being erased, I said. Not all at once, gradually. Like someone was going through my life with a pencil eraser and rubbing out every part that had her in it, and what was left was the outline of a person, but not a person. Rooms I used to share. Sunday mornings that used to mean something. Inside jokes that just became words. You don't lose a marriage in one moment. You lose it in 1,000 tiny ones. And then one day you look around and everything is just slightly wrong. The apartment is the wrong size. The bed is the wrong width. Dinner is cereal because cooking for one feels like a punishment. I stopped. I'd said more than I'd meant to. It came out the way things come out at 2 in the morning to someone you've known for 4 hours, honest in a way that scared me a little. June was quiet. Then she said, "That's the first real thing you've told me all night. I told you about the squirrel." The squirrel was deflection. This was real. She was right. And the fact that she could tell the difference after 4 hours told me something about her that I filed away in a part of my brain I'd been keeping locked. "Why do you sing to yourself?" I asked. "Because if I don't make noise, the apartment gets too quiet and the quiet starts sounding like her." She was loud. She sang in the kitchen, she talked to the TV, she narrated everything she was doing like she was hosting a cooking show that nobody was watching. When she died, the silence was the worst part, not the grief. The grief I expected, the silence I didn't, so I sing badly, to fill the space. Barbara the fern. What about her? You talked to her too. June smiled, small and tired. I talk to everything. The plants, the books, coffee maker when it's being slow. It's not crazy. It's just the sound of someone being alive in a room. She paused. My therapist says it's healthy, which is therapist code for at least you're not doing something worse. I thought about my apartment on the other side of the wall, how quiet it was, how I'd let the quiet become the whole texture of my life. I hadn't even put on music in weeks. I'd sit on the couch in silence and let the hours pass like someone watching a train go by from a platform. No intention of boarding. And I remembered what Maya said to me 3 weeks ago, during one of her Tuesday calls, after I'd told her I was fine for the 900th time. "Ethan," she'd said, "you don't have to earn the right to be happy again. It's not a license you get back after a waiting period. It's a door, and it's always unlocked. You just have to stop standing on the other side of it pretending it's bolted shut." I'd hung up and eaten cereal and ignored the sentence entirely. But sitting on June's kitchen floor in the dark, hearing her tell me why she talks to ferns and sings happy birthday to herself, I understood what Maya meant. Not because the words changed. Because I was finally in a room where they made sense. Something flickered. Both of us looked up. The kitchen light buzzed once, a thin electric hum, and for half a second the overhead fluorescent sputtered to life and threw sharp, white light across the room. June's face went from candlelight to daylight in an instant, and I saw her clearly, fully, no shadows, no warm glow, just her. Real and tired and beautiful in the way that people are beautiful when they're not trying to be. Then the light died. The kitchen went dark again. "False alarm," June said. We sat in the returning darkness. The candles reasserted themselves, warm and uneven, and the apartment went back to being the place it had been before the light interrupted. I realized I was relieved. The fluorescent had felt like an intrusion, like someone turning on the house lights in the middle of a conversation you weren't ready to leave. June seemed to feel it too. She leaned back against the cabinet and pulled the blanket up and didn't move toward the light switch. Neither did I. We chose the dark together, without saying a word about it. A knock came at the door, 3 sharp raps. June got up and opened it. A man was standing in the hallway holding a dead flashlight. 5B. I'd seen him checking his mail. Tall, gray beard, always wearing the same green jacket. "Hey, sorry to bother you. You wouldn't happen to have any candles? We're completely out upstairs." June glanced back at me. The apartment behind her was glowing with 20 tea lights, the wax pooling on the counter, the windowsill lit up like a small chapel. "Sorry," she said, "we just used our last one." If you've been enjoying this story, take a second and subscribe to the channel. I tell stories like this every week. Now back to the night. The man said no problem and shuffled down the hall, and June closed the door and turned around and looked at me, and I looked at her, and neither of us said anything about the 20 candles burning behind her like a small constellation. "That was a blatant lie," I said. "That was a strategic resource allocation decision. You're surrounded by candles. I'm surrounded by atmosphere. There's a difference." She sat back down, closer this time, close enough that when she pulled the blanket around her shoulders, it brushed against my arm. "He would have stayed and talked about the building's electrical system for 40 minutes, she said. "I've made that mistake before. Don Mitchell from 5B has opinions about circuit breakers the way some people have opinions about politics. Strong, loud, and completely unwanted." I was laughing, really laughing. Not the polite kind from earlier in the hallway that had echoed and surprised me. This was the real kind. The kind that comes from your stomach and takes your whole face with it. I couldn't remember the last time I'd laughed like that. Not since before the divorce, before the cereal, before the floor became my dining room. June was laughing too, the sound of both of us laughing in her dark kitchen at 1 in the morning over a lie we'd told a man about candles was the warmest thing I'd felt in over a year. When the laughing slowed, she looked at the guitar leaning against the couch. The dusty one. The one with the embroidered suns on the strap. "You want to hear those 4 bars?" she said. "I've been waiting all night." She got up and took the guitar off the wall and sat back down and positioned it on her lap and played the opening of Blackbird by the Beatles. She played it slowly and carefully, and she messed up the 2nd bar and started over and messed up the 3rd bar and stopped and looked at me. 3 years, she said. "You got the 1st bar perfect. 1 bar per year. At this pace the song will outlive me." She played it again. 4 bars. The notes filled the dark apartment, imperfect and halting and real, and I sat there listening to this woman I'd lived next to for 2 years play a song she couldn't finish. And something in my chest shifted. Not broke, not opened, just shifted, like a window that had been painted shut, and someone had finally pushed hard enough to crack the seal. June set the guitar down. She pulled her knees up to her chest, the same way she had on the roof, arms wrapped around them, making herself small. "Can I tell you something?" she said. "Yeah." "I almost didn't answer the door tonight. When you knocked, I heard you out there and I almost didn't open it. I had the cake and the candle and I was going to sit in the dark and eat it alone and go to bed and pretend it was just another Tuesday. That was the plan. Birthday cake, self-pity, sleep, a beautiful 3-course evening." "What made you open it?" She was quiet for a second. The candles flickered. Through the wall, faintly, the battery radio from somewhere in the building was playing something slow and quiet. "I was tired of the plan," she said. "I've been doing the same thing every birthday since she died. Bake the cake, sing the song, eat alone, and every year I tell myself it's a tradition, and every year it feels less like a tradition and more like a sentence. Like I'm serving time for something, and I heard you knock and I thought, this is the moment. This is where you either keep doing what you've been doing, or you open the door." She looked at me. I opened the door. We sat there. The candles burned. The building breathed around us. Through the floor I could hear someone pacing, slow footsteps going back and forth, and through the ceiling the couple upstairs had gone quiet, probably asleep, and the city outside the window was still dark, still holding its breath, and the only sound in June's apartment was the 2 of us not talking in a way that said more than talking would have. I reached over and picked up the guitar. I couldn't play either. I knew even less than she did. I put my fingers on the strings the way I'd seen people do in movies, and I strummed once and it sounded like a cat being startled. June covered her mouth. "That's the worst sound I've ever heard," she said. "I'm a natural." You're a war crime. I strummed again, worse. She took the guitar back, laughing, and our hands touched on the neck of it, both of us holding it at the same time, and this time neither of us pulled away. The apartment was warm from the candles. The tea had gone cold. Somewhere outside a siren passed, distant and fading, and the dark city stretched out beyond the windows in every direction. And we were sitting on a kitchen floor at 1 a.m, two people who had spent years being alone in rooms that shared a wall. And the wall was still there, but it didn't matter anymore. It had stopped being a wall and started being a door. And the door was open, and neither of us was going to close it. June's hand was still on the guitar neck. Mine was still next to it. The space between our fingers was the width of a fret, maybe less. "Ethan," she said. And the way she said my name, quiet and certain, like she'd been practicing it and hadn't known it, told me that whatever happened next was going to be different from everything that came before. Not bigger or louder, just true, the way a note is true when it finally lands where it's supposed to. And then the lights came on. Not slowly, not a gentle brightening, but all at once, every bulb in the building snapping to life like someone had thrown a switch on the entire block. The overhead fluorescent in June's kitchen buzzed and clicked and filled the room with that flat, colorless, institutional white that makes everything look like a hospital waiting room. I blinked. June blinked. We were sitting on our kitchen floor surrounded by 20 tea lights that suddenly looked ridiculous, like candles at a birthday party that had been going on too long. The guitar was between us. The cake plate was on the floor with crumbs and a fork. 2 mugs of cold tea sat next to the stove. Everything that had felt intimate and deliberate 3 seconds ago now looked like a mess. The refrigerator hummed back to life. The microwave beeped. Somewhere down the hall a TV came on loud, blaring the middle of a show someone had been watching hours ago, and a voice shouted, finally, from one of the floors below. June looked up at the fluorescent light, the way you look at someone who just walked into a conversation they weren't invited to. "Well," she said, "there goes the ambiance." The thing about darkness is it gives you permission. Not to lie, but to be honest in a way the light doesn't allow. In the dark, you're a voice and a shape in the warmth of another person sitting close. In the light, you're back to being yourself, the specific version of yourself that exists in daylight. The one with obligations and a lease and a job and an apartment 6 feet away. I watched June stand up and start collecting the cake plates. She moved around the kitchen with a briskness that hadn't been there before. Stacking mugs, tossing forks into the sink, folding the blanket she'd been wearing over her shoulders. It was cleanup, but it was also something else. A return to the daytime version of herself. The version that didn't sit on kitchen floors with strangers and tell them about her mother. I got up too. My knees cracked. My back was stiff from sitting on tile for 3 hours. I picked up my flashlight from the counter, the little squeeze one that had been useless all night, and I held it like a prop in a play that was ending. "I should let you sleep," I said. "Yeah." She was running water over the cake plate, not looking at me. "It's late, or early. I genuinely can't tell anymore." I walked toward her door. I put my hand on the knob. Through the hallway I could see the fluorescent strip lights blazing, harsh and buzzing, turning the corridor into something out of a government building. My door was right there. 4A, 8 steps across the hall. I stood there. The thing about choosing to leave is that it's the easiest decision in the world. You've been doing it your whole life. You leave conversations before they get hard. You leave relationships before they get close. You leave rooms before people can see you clearly enough to form an opinion. You walk away and you tell yourself it's because you're tired, or because it's late, or because the other person probably wants their space. And none of those things are lies exactly, but none of them are the truth either. The truth is you're afraid that the version of yourself that existed in the dark, the honest one, the open one, the one who said real things on a kitchen floor, won't survive in the light. My hand was on the knob. I could hear June behind me, putting the cake in the fridge, the click of the door, the soft thud of it closing, normal sounds. Morning after sounds, the kind of sounds that mean the night is over, and it's time to go back to being strangers who share a wall. I turned around. She was standing by the kitchen counter, wiping it down with a towel, and she stopped when she saw me still there. "The song," I said. "What?" "When the power went out, before I knocked the first time, you were singing Happy Birthday. But after you blew out the candle, before you went quiet, you were humming something else. Something that wasn't Happy Birthday." She put the towel down. "You heard that? The walls in this building are decorative, your words." She almost smiled. "It was my mom's song. She used to hum it when she was cooking. I don't even know what it's called. I just know the melody. Will you finish it? She looked at me. The fluorescent light was doing nothing for either of us. We looked tired. We looked like two people who had stayed up too late and said too much, and were now standing in a bright kitchen at 3 in the morning, wondering what the rules were. You want me to hum a song at 3 a.m., she said. I want to hear how it ends. She held my gaze. Something passed between us, not a look, not a decision, something more like a recognition. Two people seeing each other in full light for the first time and choosing not to look away. She hummed it, quietly. A melody I didn't know, something slow and a little sad, with a turn in the middle that lifted it up before bringing it back down. She hummed it all the way through, standing by her kitchen counter in the ugly fluorescent light with crumbs on the floor and cold tea on the stove, and I stood in her doorway and listened. And the song filled the space between us the way candlelight had filled it earlier, with warmth and presence and the particular weight of something that matters. When she finished, the apartment was quiet. The building had settled. The sirens and the radios and the neighbor voices had all gone to sleep, and it was just the hum of the refrigerator and the buzz of the light and the two of us, standing in the wreckage of a birthday party neither of us had planned. That's a good song, I said. Yeah, she said. She had good taste. I said good night. She said good night. I walked across the hall to 4A and closed the door and stood in my apartment, which was now fully lit, the lamp on the end table glowing, the kitchen light burning, the microwave clock blinking 12:00 because it didn't know what time it was. Everything was on and bright and humming, and my apartment looked exactly the way it had looked for 14 months. Bare walls, empty surfaces, a throw pillow with a coffee stain, shaped like Ohio. I turned off every light, not because I was going to sleep, because I wanted the quiet back. I lay on my bed in the dark and listened to the building. Through the wall, I heard June's footsteps, the bathroom faucet, a cabinet opening and closing. Then her lights clicked off too, one by one, and her apartment went dark, and we were both lying in the dark again, on opposite sides of the same wall. But it was different now. The wall was still there. 6 inches of drywall and 2 coats of paint. It hadn't moved. It hadn't gotten thinner. I was still on my side, and she was still on hers, and nothing about the physical distance between us had changed. But I'd been through her door. I knew what her kitchen floor felt like. I knew her mother's cake recipe used coffee instead of water. I knew she named her ferns and talked to them like they were coworkers. I knew the sound of her humming a song she couldn't name. Walls don't change. People do. I fell asleep sometime around 4, the deepest sleep I'd had in months. I woke up at 9 to my phone buzzing Maya. I picked up. Hey. You sound different, she said. She didn't bother with hello or how are you. Just that observation, direct and unpadded, the way Maya does everything. I just woke up. That's not what I mean, and you know it. I didn't say anything. I could hear her kids in the background. The 6th kid was counting. 6, 8, 9, still no 7. Did something happen? She asked. The power came back on. Ethan. I had cake. With the birthday girl? With June, yeah. She was quiet for a moment. Maya's silences are louder than most people's sentences. They have texture. This one had the texture of someone choosing very carefully not to say I told you so. How was the cake? She said. Raw in the middle, chocolate, coffee in the batter. Best cake I've had in years. Are you going to see her again? She lives next door, Maya. I see her every day. You know what I'm asking. I did know what she was asking, and for the first time in 14 months, I didn't have a deflection ready. No clever redirect about cereal or squirrels or being fine. I think so, I said. Yeah. Good, she said it simply, like it was a fact about the weather, the same way June had said I was hoping you'd come back. Maya didn't push. She told me about the 7 kid, who had now started including 7 but was putting it after 9, so the count went 6, 8, 9, 7, 10, which was technically progress. I laughed and we talked for another minute before hanging up. She said, be good. I said I'd try. I got up and made coffee. I stood in my kitchen, which was bright with morning light, sun coming through the window, the city outside looking scrubbed and knew the way it does after any interruption. The power was on. The Wi-Fi was back. My laptop was charged and the Ohio pillow was on the couch and everything was exactly where I'd left it. I poured 2 cups of coffee. I didn't think about it. I just did it. One in my mug, the chipped blue one, and one in a mug I never used, a plain white one that had come with the apartment, still in the cabinet because I'd never had anyone to pour it for. I picked up both mugs and walked across the hall and knocked on her door. 3 knocks, the same 3 I'd used the night before. Not too loud, not too soft. but this time without the plausible deniability. This time I meant it. She opened the door. She was holding 2 mugs of coffee. We looked at each other. We looked at the 4 mugs. 2 of mine, 2 of hers. She was wearing the same flannel from last night, sleeves still rolled, her hair still in the bun that was losing the fight. The morning light coming through the hallway window caught the side of her face, and she looked exactly like herself, not a painting or a candlelight version of a person. Just June Calloway standing in her doorway with too much coffee, and a small smile that had already been approved by all departments. "Great mind," she said. "I brought you coffee." "I see that. I also brought you coffee." "That's a lot of coffee." "That's a good morning." I stood there in the bright hallway of a building I'd lived in for 14 months without ever knowing anyone in it. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead. The elevator dinged on a floor below us. A door opened somewhere and footsteps went down the stairs, and the building did its ordinary morning thing. People leaving for work, people living their lives. June stepped back from her door, the same small step from last night. The one that's an invitation without being a declaration. I stepped through. I want to tell you that I figured everything out that morning, that I walked through June Calloway's door and became a different person. Braver, more open, healed. But that's not how it works. People don't transform overnight. They start. They take one step across a hallway and sit down with coffee and eat leftover birthday cake at 9 in the morning and talk about nothing important. They learn that change doesn't arrive as a thunderbolt. It arrives as a pattern, a new habit, a repeated choice. You knock on the door again and again. And eventually the knocking stops being something you have to decide to do and starts being something you just do, the way you make coffee or brush your teeth or breathe. I'd spent 14 months treating loneliness like something that happened to me, like weather, like a condition I'd caught from the divorce, chronic and untreatable, something I just had to live with the way you live with a bad knee or a kitchen table you can't look at. But loneliness wasn't something that happened to me, it was something I kept choosing. Every time I held the elevator and didn't say hello. Every time I heard footsteps through the wall and didn't knock. Every time I said I'm fine when I wasn't. I was choosing it over and over, and the only thing that changed was that one night the power went out, and I heard someone singing through a wall, and I made a different choice. I knocked. That's the whole story, if I'm honest. Everything else, the cake, the rooftop, the stars, the guitar, the raw middle, and the coffee batter and the fern named Barbara, all of it grew from one knock on a door I'd been walking past for 2 years. June set her coffee down on the counter. She opened the fridge and pulled out the cake, half-eaten, edges burned, middle still raw. She cut 2 pieces and handed me a fork. "Birthday breakfast," she said. "Your birthday was yesterday. I'm extending the celebration, new policy." We sat at her kitchen table this time, not the floor. The table felt right in the morning. It felt like a beginning. Through the wall, faint and muffled, someone in the building was singing. Not June, someone else. Someone who had maybe also had a night where the darkness made them brave enough to be heard. I ate the cake. It was still raw in the middle. It was still the best cake I'd ever had. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't on the other side of anything. If stories like this one stay with you, there are more of them on the channel.